You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 95, all about draft feedback on assignments, coursework, and assessment. Because yes, draft feedback is an excellent opportunity to up-level and learn about how to achieve higher level criteria. But I have seen lots of instances where students feel confused, frustrated, or just downright annoyed by the feedback they receive, or sometimes lack of it. So here are some reasons why this occurs and what your teen can do about it. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Hey VIPs, I hope you and your teens are doing fantastic. I am feeling a little bit feisty today because I am going to talk about draft feedback. And this can be a little bit controversial if you didn't know. I have seen all sorts of issues with it. So much so that these days schools often produce a whole official document on what feedback is, what it isn't, when it should be given, how much of it, how it's delivered, and more. And understandably so, from the schools and teachers' perspective and from the students and parents, because I have seen huge variations when it comes to teacher feedback. Variations in how much feedback is actually given. Sometimes it's loads of detailed annotations with observations, suggestions, and to-do items. And other times it's simply a few ticks or underlines with a simple 2-word comment at the end. Sometimes feedback is returned the very next day, and sometimes it can be over a week or more before students get feedback returned. Sometimes it's super specific. Other times it's more general. Sometimes it will vary in format. It might be verbal. It might be written. It might be individual feedback, or sometimes I see it given as a whole to a whole class. Now, I will say from the outset of this episode that back when I was a full-time teacher, I am sure there were times when my feedback on drafts or assignments was not perfect. No one is perfect and everyone can make mistakes or could do something better in hindsight. But I will say that I always do my best to give the most appropriate, specific, and detailed feedback possible to students. And now that I get to do this on group coaching calls in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program and even one-to-one in coaching sessions in Next Level Coaching, I get to go super deep and detailed with individual students and on individual tasks and pieces of work, not just in the midst of marking like 90 pieces or having to stick to school or department guidelines. And on that note, I will also caveat this episode with the fact that there are often parameters or guidelines and protocols to giving feedback within schools or within subject departments. And I will touch on this again a little bit later, but teachers are often tied to certain amounts or types of feedback so that there is parity across all students and across all teachers marking. And that is something that your teen can't really affect, but they can affect what that feedback is. Maybe not the amount or the type, but what it actually consists of and how useful it is to them. They often can influence that, and I'm going to share how. Because this episode really stems from so many experiences that I have seen or heard about with students. Because now that I do some relief teaching, rather than being full-time teaching with my own classes, as much as students can sometimes give substitute or supply teachers a hard time, what they will also often do is open up and share things that they wouldn't to their full-time teachers. So I have heard all of the complaining and issues and drama about feedback from students about what has or hasn't happened with their drafts, or even with completed assessments, and the feedback that they have or haven't been given, some of which I have felt are justified or I've sympathized with, and some of which I haven't, which sometimes gently, sometimes bluntly, and always kindly, I then explain to those students. But even though I have had plenty of opportunities to consider this topic, I will say that this particular episode has been triggered by a consult I recently had with a student and their parent who filled me in a little bit more on a history assignment that they had worked on with me in a group coaching call while they were in the 10-week grade transformation program. And I didn't know it during the coaching, but this student had actually already had feedback on their draft, and the teacher had simply told them to correct a capital letter where they'd missed it. And this is a hardworking student who really wanted some valuable and actionable feedback to get the best mark they could. So they brought the task to a coaching call, and although honestly I can't remember exactly what feedback I gave, I can tell you it was not spelling, punctuation, or grammar based. In fact, being a history assignment, it definitely would have been an analytical or evaluative piece, and I definitely would have had plenty to comment on and feedback on with that, both positive things where they really were analysing or evaluating, and areas to improve to take them further or fill in gaps. So from students I've taught, students in lessons I cover today, those that I work with in the 10WGT and in next level coaching, and I even reflect back as a student myself, what I see is that feedback on assignments and coursework and other assessments can lead to all sorts of frustrations from students and from their parents. So what I want to consider today is what is and isn't being shared in the feedback your teen is getting, and why it is super important to be aware of this. And consider what your teen can do in order to get the most relevant and useful feedback possible that will actually help them improve the quality and criteria matching or meeting content in their writing. So they receive feedback that is super constructive, not just stuff that they could have figured out or done for themselves. And that brings me to the point that I really want to get across in this episode. It is something that I tell all students. That is that they need to submit their best possible and as complete as possible piece of work for a draft. A draft is still complete. A draft does not mean partly done. And I say this for two reasons. First, official reason is because the teacher or marker can only provide feedback on what's required to get to the next level of criteria or the next rung up the ladder. So if the draft submission is currently at a C grade, your teen is going to get feedback to get it to a B, maybe even just to a C+ or a B-. If it's at a D, the feedback is going to be about what's needed to get to a C grade. They're not going to be given steps or requirements that will get it to an A. And this is where I see students fall down or get disappointed or frustrated because they do everything that is on that feedback, but then they still come out with a less than top result. And then the second, less official reason is that there is a possibility that the teacher is just going to be looking for the most obvious and simple fixes to suggest. Either because they actually are a little bit lazy. Yep, I said it. Yep, I've said it. We all know it. Just like in any profession, in life, there are some lazy teachers out there. Just like there are some lazy lawyers or supermarket stock replenishers or mechanics or veterinary surgeons even. My sister is a vet. I have heard some stories. But also, even if the teacher is the most dedicated, committed teacher in the world, If that teacher has just 2 classes to mark, 60 pieces to mark, and the students understandably want them back as soon as possible by the next lesson that they have, then even if that teacher took just 10 minutes on each one, then that is 600 minutes or 10 hours of marking. And therefore, fast and obvious is sometimes the most doable option. So given this, I want students to not give their teacher a fast or easy go of it. And remember, I say this as a teacher myself. I used to tell this to my classes, even when I was full-time teaching. I didn't want them to give me an easy ride. I would say, make sure you give in your best possible quality and content, because then you will get the most useful feedback, not things that you already know that you need to go and do. Make me really look for ways that you can improve. Don't give me basic or easy options for your feedback. Because I see so many students give in draft with sometimes whole sections missing. And it makes it too easy for the teacher to then just give feedback saying, well done, you've completed sections 1 and 2, whatever those are. And to improve, you need to actually do section 3. Now, I'm obviously oversimplifying a little bit there, but also I will say in some cases that's not a massive oversimplification of what is happening. But another way that this might show up is things like spelling and punctuation mistakes. So if they have not proofread and there are those sorts of errors in there, then one improvement a teacher might give is to proofread and correct their SPAG, their spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Now, honestly, as a teacher, I will always mark and give feedback on the parts that are actually complete as well. Because personally, I just cannot help myself. I want to give that feedback. But technically, if a teacher was just sticking to 1 or 2 things that would move this piece up the criteria, then actually giving advice like completing all of the sections would be one of them. And yes, there may be examples where your teen really does do their very best, like the student I spoke with recently, and then they still only get feedback on a random typo, like you need a capital letter here. And that is an issue that you may want to take further unless that piece of work is otherwise getting full marks, as it is. And that literally was the only issue that they could see. Everything else is hitting every part of every top criteria. But if there is any part of the task that your teen knows that they need to do but hasn't, like maybe they'd say, I know I need a graph here, but I haven't made it yet. Or I know I need to add a conclusion and I'm going to write that later. Or obviously I'll proofread it, but I'll do that at the end. Then they need to do those things before handing in their draft. Otherwise, they run the risk of getting feedback that tells them what they already know. And they are going to have wasted the opportunity to get useful feedback that will actually move them up the marking criteria. What they want is to get feedback that they didn't already know, improvements that they hadn't been aware of, or elements that they hadn't realized that they had missed. Improvements or changes that they wouldn't or couldn't have come up with themselves. And actually, this is part of the reason that sometimes simple or obvious feedback is given by some teachers. In fact, I will just say, I know it is because, yes, I talk to a lot of students and parents, but I also talk to a lot of teachers. And I can tell you, they will give the obvious or I'll whisper it, lazy or basic type of feedback when they feel that the student has been lazy or not given their best effort in submitting the draft in the first place. So this has been a fairly open and honest sharing and reflection of things on this episode. I hope that it is worth it for you. I am always happy to tell things like they are, especially if it will make an impact. So next time your teen is submitting a draft, please mention this to them. Make sure that they are giving in their best possible work, especially if they have a teacher who they think doesn't necessarily give them great feedback. Have them force that teacher to work hard to find a quality improvement, not a basic one. Make sure they are submitting their best work so the feedback they get is educational in itself. It actually educates them in how to do better. Gives them something they didn't already know. Gives them something that genuinely helps them improve the quality of their work and their understanding of the criteria and how to meet them. Please let me know if this has helped in any way, or just tell me your tales of draft feedback if you like. I'm also happy to hear rants and any real life experiences. Email support@rocksolidstudy.com if you have any feedback to share. I always love to receive your stories, your experiences, and your feedback. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will catch you back here next week. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program, and I'll see you there.